In further developments now, the economic and trade impact caused by geopolitical tensions has come into sharp focus at the high-profile meeting of business leaders in Cape Town. It takes place ahead of the meeting of G20 finance ministers and central bank governors. Business editor Xolani Mbanjwa joins us live from the B20 gathering. Xolani, people want to know about jobs and affordability in a rising cost of living environment. Are these issues that business is discussing at the core of discourse at the B20?
Good evening, Tumi-sang. Indeed, those are the issues that are at the core of these discussions at the B20, and it's about making sure that the economies in these top 20 economies, not only in those economies but others that are less fortunate, do find ways to create an affordable living environment for their markets, but also look at economies and jobs. That's the bare minimum that these people who are gathering here have to actually achieve. This B20 meeting is a very important one, focusing on a number of issues, but I am joined by the B20 Sherpa, the person who leads the B20 from the South African perspective, that is Kes Kuvadia, to talk to us more about the meeting that has taken place in the past 2 days. Mr. Kuvadia, thank you for your time. Looking at the trade and geopolitical tensions caused by the second, tenure in office of U.S. President Donald Trump, let's talk about the high-profile decisions and recommendations that you have come up with here from this B20 that are going to talk about those high-profile issues.
Okay, and thanks for having me, and hello to your viewers. So firstly, just let me say this is essentially the launch of the B20. A lot of the policy work starts now, and we'll come out with policy recommendations to the G20 countries toward August. So we don't have the recommendations now, right? But in the last day and a half, the overlay of decisions taken by the current Trump administration has been there, and we've been talking about it. Our view is that we need to continue the work of the B20 on the basis that even businesses in America remain committed to the B20 process, and we've had lots of support from countries in Europe, and obviously we've had a lot of support from countries in the South. And certainly my view is that some of the messages coming out from the US on tariffs and those sorts of things has created a situation that countries in the North and countries in the South probably have something in common in responding to this. Because he's talking about tariffs against countries in Europe. He's talking tariffs about, obviously, countries in the South and Asian countries and so on. So the B20 gives business the opportunity to sit down and say, okay, how does business respond to the current situation, to the current geopolitics? And those are the discussions we need to have. Mention was made today that America is responsible for about 13% of global trade. There's 87% of global trade that wants multilateral institutions, that wants to have a globalized economy where we actually are able to collaborate to actually see how we build our economies and how we work together to create inclusive economies that actually address poverty and unemployment and other social issues that we have. And that's what we want to concentrate on. We would invite America to join that process. It's up to America to decide whether they want to or not.
What's going to be on the agenda as you launch today, going forward in the next meetings that are going to be taking place before August when you make those recommendations?
So the task force, we have 8 task forces ranging from, just transition and energy, trade and investment, finance and infrastructure, education and employment, business ethics, food security and agriculture, digital innovation, industrial innovation. All of these task forces will begin to meet. They'll meet at least once a month virtually. And we will share with our government as well as publicly the policy iterations that come out from each meeting. And so between the chair, the deputy chair, and co-chair of each task force, and the knowledge partners that will support each task force, we will go through a process of, through the next 6 months or so, developing those policy recommendations. We want them to be action and implementation oriented. We've spoken to our counterparts in the US, the American Chamber of Commerce, to whom we hand over toward the end of this year. They are quite keen on actionable recommendations as well, which they can track next year to see whether they've been implemented or not. And that's going to be the process. So it's a significantly exhaustive process in each of the task forces. We will hand over recommendations to our president toward the end of August or so. He will then put that into the G20 process before the G20 summit. And we will, for part of September and October, we will use to actually advocate our position, both with our government and other G20 governments, see what then comes out at the G20 summit. And then depending on what comes out there, we will talk to the American Chamber of Commerce about next steps, whether our recommendations have been announced, and if they have been announced, how do we track implementation and so on, and if they haven't been announced, how do next year, under the American Chamber of Commerce hosting it, we actually take that up further.
There's a lot of work that is waiting for you as the B20 Sherpa. So from what I'm hearing, what has been said by Marco Rubio has not diminished the work of the B20 on this side, and you don't think it's going to impact the work that you are doing, since you have to hand over the reins at the end of the year to the Americans?
Yeah, so I'm not saying it's not going to impact the work we're doing. We obviously have to take these issues into account, but I don't think that we should put ourselves in a position where we're saying that because a country, and an important country, still the biggest economy in the world and so on, and a big investor in South Africa, we want to maintain good relations with America, but what we are saying is that we cannot only be informed by what the American administration is saying, we have to be informed by what the G20 country administrations are saying, and that will inform our work, and we will take into account the global politics in making the recommendations.
Mr. Kuvadia, thank you so much. A lot of work waiting for him as the Sherpa for the B20, and of course, making sure that as the business leadership, high-profile business leadership, they do consider, and at the center of what they're discussing throughout the year, as far as social issues such as unemployment and many others are actually concerned. The launch has been quite a huge success over the past 2 days, and we wait for the finance ministers and central bank governors meeting over the next 2 days, starting later in Cape Town tomorrow, opened by President Cyril Ramaphosa tomorrow morning. We'll bring you that live here from Cape Town. Back to you in studio, Dumisang.